up in Hayward as far as in response to the COVID-19 up there, because I know Hayward's been doing some interesting things, and Jayanti has been involved in that. We're going to ask her, just a few light questions, things like maybe what she was doing if she was not a librarian, her favorite book, movie, music, and food, what she's been doing to pass the time. And the other thing that she is actually going to maybe spend, a fairly decent amount of time during our webinar, since this is a leadership program, is about the art of listening, because yeah, it's a great skill, and I think any leader needs to be able to do it. And Jayanti, who I think is a great listener, is going to tell us, her secret for doing that. So with that, welcome, Jayanti Addleman, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you for having me. Thank you to everyone who joined. I'm so glad that you could take some time off in these crazy times to come join us, and hopefully we'll share some fun information and useful information. So.
Okay, so with that, I was going to read your bio, but it's just going to be better. Just tell us about yourself, and start from the beginning too, because I think your beginnings were probably a little bit different than mine for sure. So take it away.
Okay, so I often get asked how I got interested in libraries, and I grew up in India, and Indian libraries are really very different from libraries, public libraries in the US. And so we have a lot of academic libraries, and a lot of the ones that are more, what should I say, popular libraries tend to be pay to use. And I lived a lot of my formative years, like, the high school and college, very close to the National Library of India. It was really it was less than a mile from my house. Excuse me, and we would walk there. I would pretty much walk there all the time. In the evenings, we would go for walks around the library, and during the daytime, I would go there to read. But the interesting thing about the library was that you had to put a deposit to borrow any books, and you could only borrow books within the amount of money you had deposited. So it was always, kind of a challenge, especially in college when books are very expensive. And I came from a middle-class family. We had a lot of advantages as, in terms of middle class, but we didn't have a lot of money. And the amount of money we put down in the library was not a lot. And, and then we were 4 sisters. All of us would use the library. My father would use the library. And so we actually had to all have our books within that cost if we wanted to bring them home. So we ended up, mostly we would just use the library over there. So when I came to the US, I was just totally amazed at, how open and how available books were to the public. And that sort of really sparked my attention. And the first time I actually sort of had an interlibrary loan offered to me, literally tears came into my eyes. Just the thought that people could get me, a librarian could get me books from pretty much anywhere in the US. It was totally amazing. And so, when it came time, I went to library school, and then, of course, after that, it was while I was at library school, that was also the time when computers were just coming into libraries. So it was just a really, really exciting time to be in libraries. And one of my professors at San Jose State was Bob Wagner, and he totally said to me, you have such an aptitude for computers, you need to intern at this big database company that's opened up. And that's how I got into Dialogue. And right from there, everything about libraries and information in the US to me were just amazing. And I was just so sucked in. But then, of course, I moved to Monterey and then moved into public libraries. And even at that time, I was still working as a consultant for Dialogue. And I worked as a consultant for quite a long time on a contract basis. But, that love of that books, information, and the online aspect of it, which has just only grown in the last 30 years is just so amazing. And to me, that's been like, this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I'm going to take to everyone, share with everyone in the US. And that's really what got me and kept me on this track.
Okay, two questions that came up while you were talking. One, what brought you to America? And then question two is, what the hell is dialogue for our young people who were...
Okay. All right. I actually came to America. I mean, I hate to say this, but with a man. So my first husband, we were here. I had never intended to immigrate, to go. I intended to go back to India, but then I got divorced and I was going to library school at that point. And so I just sort of ended up staying over here. And what was your second question?
What is dialogue?
Oh my gosh. Okay.
I mean, I know it, but I'm sure anyone who was...
And those of us who talk about dialogue, we really do show our age. But it was the original and preeminent information, the database company. And it was basically at that time, it was the way you accessed everything, whether it was the Gale databases, Dun and Bradstreet. I mean, pretty much all of the databases we use now still were then through, on your IEEE, all of the journals, everything was through a dialogue. And everything we did at dialogue that time, dialogue was so far ahead of its time that really it was hard for it to survive. Everything we're doing now, we were already doing with dialogue at that time. And whether you talk of email or chat, or we were doing all of that then. But, it just was way ahead of its time. And dialogue is still around now, but not in the sense, not the big, just dynamic company it was at that time.
I remember it. Also, that it was a little bit expensive too, right?
Actually, it wasn't. We think nothing about paying to, $15,000, $20,000 for a database these days.
That's true. Okay.
And if you count what the per search rate is, it is really expensive. Some of them we pay a lot for one user or for 10 users.
Yeah, right.
Whereas in those days, because we charged by the search, which was really a much more sensible way, if you think about it, even now we would not pay 10,000 and 20,000 to some of the database companies if you just paid for the searches. But, people, just especially librarians, found it very hard. And librarians have always had the challenge of having, getting money. And so it was very difficult. That whole model was just hard. Yeah.
Okay, so, you're in the US, you decide I'm going to go to library school. So what was your library career arc? I mean, somehow I can't imagine you being a children's librarian, but, where did you start?
So I actually love children's programming. And so my first job was, I was actually the Sunday librarian at Monterey Public. And that was my first public library job. And after that, I went to Salinas Public. I became a full-time librarian. And almost immediately, and I was a really very, very fresh public librarian, but I very soon got promoted and became they called it, I was basically the head of reference, and it was sort of like the assistant director position because I oversaw the large main library. And then after I was there for about 7 years, then I went to Hartnell College, which is a community college. And at that same time, I also started working at Gavilan College. And one of the things about my career, I will say, is I really like challenges. So when I find myself getting very comfortable in a job, I really feel like it's time to change. I also think what I do, and I also think it's really kind of nice when directors move, because sometimes, and some of us are better, and I know, Robert, you were really good about, just embracing a lot of new things. But sometimes directors, we tend to get very stuck in our ways. We have our priorities. And so movement among the top administration is actually good, I feel, sometimes for libraries, because then they get fresh ideas, fresh blood. So for me, after Hartnell, then I moved to Monterey County. And so that was, so I kind of did this. My 7 to 10 years is my normal in a job. I ended up staying a little longer in Monterey County because, Monterey County, we had, we kind of went through this recession and the budget was really tough, and I did not want to leave while the budget was in, we were having challenges. So I really wanted to make sure we were in a good place before I left. And so, and then, I felt, okay, I've been in Monterey for a long time. My kids are gone. My husband's retired. I can do whatever I want. And I just thought, I was ready. Let me go back to a big city, see what I want to be near. San Francisco, I love going to the theater. I love eating out. So, I started looking in the Bay Area, and then here I am. So, yeah, yeah.
I mean, I really think it's great that you were comfortable enough to say that as a director. Sometimes we just need to move on because we start getting, I'm not going to say you get stale maybe, but yeah, you get good, or you're not challenging yourself anymore. And I really think that's important, that even as a director, you need to keep challenging yourself. So
You
good
need
for
to
you.
challenge yourselves, and also the staff. Staff get to know you very well. They get very comfortable. And I think every time a new person comes in, it actually shakes everything up, and everyone, really a lot of fresh ideas flow. So I think it works on all levels.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward now. You're in Hayward, and I mean, you came into basically a new library and when you started, it still was not open. So what was that like, just trying to get that building ready to go?
So that's probably one of the most interesting challenges in my career. And I've had a lot of interesting challenges. I actually love working with new buildings, and I've done a lot of buildings, either planning or actual overseeing the construction. I've done moves, just remodels. A lot of this, I have done quite a few buildings. But coming to Hayward, and one of the charges for me was, get the library open. It's a huge project, $60 million project, which had been basically had stalled. And it was really kind of, they were having problems with the contractors. Have those problems gone away? Not really. We still have some of the problems. But what my idea was that it doesn't really matter. It's this idea, we often talk of perfect versus good enough. And that was really what it was, that are we ready? Can we just open it up to the public? This was the Hayward Library is a project that the community, they, passed a sales tax. So much went into it. There were big donations, big donors, small donors. And this was a really beloved project for the public. And suddenly, what was a really good thing was not a good thing anymore. It was really making people unhappy. And so the idea was, and I worked with the staff. Hayward has an amazing team. The staff were really, they were having a really hard time. They were all cramped in these quarters. They out of the building, the old building. They were all distributed within different departments in the city. And so it was like, it doesn't matter. Okay, so we don't have the children's story time room. Okay, so we don't have the audio video lab as yet, but we have our computers. We have our books, we have the shelving, we have the checkout machines. Let's open. And so that's what we did. But it was really kind of incredible because one of the things, I had been talking consistently with the city that the staff need about 8 weeks. We had actually started with 12 weeks to go in and set things up. And, we did they said, oh, okay. And so we set a date based on that. And then, of course, it got delayed. And so we said, okay, if not 12 weeks, 8 weeks, not 8 weeks, 6 weeks. In the end, we had precisely 2 weeks for the staff once we got in to get it all open and set up. And it's a huge building. But, Hayward staff just rallied and did it. And, and in a way, I always think that if you talk of crisis management, and that's something, that was a case of real crisis management. And so we go through in our lives, one crisis after another, and every crisis prepares you for the next new one. And so that was definitely a case of crisis management. And I think we came through with flying colors.
All right, well, we're going to go on to crisis management, but before we do that, just one question for you. And actually this one's for the everyone out there in the audience as well. So if you were not a librarian, ideally, what would you like to be doing? And best answer from the audience, Jayanti and I will buy you a virtual drink tonight. Okay?
Yes, definitely, yeah.
So let's
So
start hearing.
I'll tell you a funny story while people are responding. So when I was deciding, I love writing. And I was really deciding whether to go to library school or whether to go to journalism school. I was like kind of torn. I love writing, but I was also in the process of going through my divorce. And my ex-husband at that time, I said to him, well, what should I do? And he kind of went library science. You should, kind of screwed his nose up at it and said, you should do journalism. And that decided it for me. Library science it was. So kind of, yeah. But I would be a journalist if I weren't a librarian.
I think they're starting to come in and some of these sound really interesting. A teacher, a paper conservator, or a psychologist, a PI,
Yeah.
nice.
Ooh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Scuba instructor, that might be worth a drink. Ooh, a bike tour guide at the Grand Canyon, nice. A literature professor. Dolly wants to be wow, I didn't know you would be a cop. Yeah, librarians on the loose. TV show, yeah, that's cool. Acting, yeah, I can see you doing that, Darnisa. Teacher. See what else we got here. A lawyer or own a bar and grill named Sweet Teas. Oh, a DJ. That's good. I can see you doing that.
Yeah.
Especially just, I can see you doing that.
I would be a party planner or a bartender. Yeah.
Dog trainer. Ooh, woodworker. That's nice. That's a great skill to have. Anything with crafts, good. Yeah. Architect or marine biologist, yeah, one or the other. They're pretty similar. Architect, poet, nice. Civil rights lawyer, investigative journalist, good.
Wow, those are awesome.
Artist.
Winemaker, yay.
Searching for agaves in all parts of their native habitat. Gosh, what was I was just watching Antique Roadshows. They did it from, I think it was Phoenix, and they had like 1 million different kind of agave plants in that garden that they were in.
Yeah. But yeah, those agave plants are just amazing. I mean, almost terrifying when you see
a couple of party planners.
Yeah.
A plant queen, whatever that might be. Oh, a landscape designer, historian, film programmer, a farmer. Open a marina. Yeah, that's good. So who gets the virtual wine from you?
I know the one to do with agave, I think, has that nice mix of, you could do, is that tequila and horticulture.
All right, sounds good. Okay, so let's talk a little bit. I mean, you kind of touched on the crisis leadership and, some real advice you might give, because, yeah, I mean, we've just been dealing with crisis after crisis of late. And maybe talk a little bit more about what you were doing, because we were talking about this before we started, about what you're actually doing now, or you were doing in Hayward as part of, the response to the whole COVID-19 thing.
Okay, so I'm going to actually just say a little bit, so while I was at Monterey County, I actually went through several major, we went through at least 2 really major fires. We went through the Sobranes and also what's the other one? But anyway, the 2008 fire. But we went through 2 really, really major fires. One where we had to actually evacuate a full library while, there was ash falling on us. You're just huge. And you could see the fire right near us. So, and then we've had floods. But, the interesting thing about the COVID-19 is every time we plan to do disaster planning for libraries, one of the things, the major concern for us is about how do we protect our collections and how do we get them out into the hands of the public. COVID is the exact opposite, because it is how do we keep these out of the hands of the public, because that's going to contribute to the sort of transmitting of the virus. So it's been kind of a completely different paradigm, managing this crisis, quite different from anything, at least I've had before. During SARS also, we did some, but we did quite a bit of, wiping down our books, but it was not at the level of this crisis. So it was really quite different. So Hayward is pretty incredible. I'm going to say I am so very proud of Hayward. We right away, it was like, we need to close. This is about shelter in place. This is about stopping the virus from spreading. So, right away we closed and we went into this mode of library services. The first thing we did was, let's start a virtual card. That was literally the first decision we made in connection with this right after we closed. And then, of course, we did all our e-resources. But Hayward, meanwhile, the city has really kind of been in the forefront. They opened up a testing site. We were the first city in this area to open a testing site, and we opened it way ahead of anyone. It took at least 2 weeks for all of the other cities to follow. And our city, they opened the testing site with the complete idea that it was going to be free. Anyone who wanted could be tested. And this is what equity is all about, about making it so that so it was open to anyone from anywhere. And, it was really quite touching for me. I was working at the site that there were first responders from cities all around who were really terrified, who were in this position of they were being exposed all the time and were not finding any way to get tested. And they were coming from really far to be tested over here. And then, of course, there were someone who had returned from Italy, just all kinds of people for different reasons. And in the beginning, they were quite overwhelmed, but they did not say no to anyone. They were pretty much just letting everyone through. Then after a while, they did cut back a little bit in that they said you had to be, vulnerable in some way, or had to have been exposed, or be showing your symptoms, and that was when they'd be testing. But it's still, we were so far ahead, and that it was really, really impressive to see how people just jumped up, how organized it was, how good people were also about how they were responding. The other thing that Hayward's done, which is really amazing also, is they have opened up. Of course, the city immediately committed they were going to pay. They made that, that they were going to pay staff through, a certain number of days. There was no question that you're going to be at home, you're going to get paid. Don't worry about it. This is what you need to do. But the city also has opened a relief fund. This is the COVID-19 relief fund, because there are a lot of people who really cannot apply for unemployment from the state or the federal government, either because they're undocumented or for some other reasons. And this fund is specifically for people undocumented or people who cannot apply. And to me, just the fact that the city would be so proactive in doing these things, they passed a moratorium on evictions, and they have just been so far ahead. So for me, that is, that's the tone. That's how we have to respond. This is how the city is responding. This is how the library needs to respond. We are going to be there. We're going to protect the staff, but we're going to serve the public, and we need to find a way to do it. Yeah.
And then you were actually involved in the testing site as well. Is that correct?
I was working at the testing site, but I was working behind the scenes. I was not actually with the patients. So one of the things I was doing, I was calling people and talking to them and taking calls. I did a lot of paperwork and things like that. So now they've pretty much caught up. So I'm not there, but I was there for the first 2.5 weeks.
Were some of the library staff working with you doing that as well?
No, I was actually the only non-first responder in that site. I was, it was only fire people and the medical. Yeah.
And you.
What's that? I'm sorry.
And you.
Yeah. And yeah, that's right. I was the only one who was the non. Yeah.
All right, so let's move into the next part of just about one thing. And if you don't know Jayanti, and I think I know her fairly well, I've known her for a while, is that she knows how to listen. And, you know, it's a skill, it's an art. And basically what I would, like you to do, I mean, just talk a little bit about it. And again, just some advice you would give to maybe, the upcoming leaders, the next generation, about why listening is so important.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter what you're doing. So one of the things I always say, to people, if you want to move ahead in your career, the first thing you need to do is focus on what you're doing now. So don't always be thinking, well, I want to be the manager. What should I be doing to prepare for being the manager? That's all well and good. But what are you doing to be a real success in what you're doing now? Be really good at the job you're doing right now. And then automatically you will become prepared for the next step. And it's that same kind of thing of being present in the moment, of really listening. And, it really irritates me. I'm sorry, I'm very easily irritated. I'm just going to say that. So when I read all these, people will talk about active listening and leaning forward and, mirroring and repeating back to people and all. To me, that's all really, it's so artificial. You just need to do what's right for you. I'll hear people saying, oh, well, look for body language. Well, if someone's sitting with their hands crossed like this, they're not listening, they're not open. That's not true. So much of it is cultural. And that's what I mean by listening, is really being aware of what it is that the person across from you is sending. What is the message they're sending you? Someone who's got their arms crossed, it might be just that they're not, they come from a culture. I'll tell you, I grew up in India. We always, when we were growing up, had to keep our chest covered. Like, it didn't matter what it was. Either your sari covers your chest, or you've got a scarf to cover your chest. So it was very difficult for me, sometimes when I was wearing a blouse, to not, automatically put my hands in front like that. It's not that I wasn't listening. It was just a natural reflex. And so, sort of this thing of trying to understand what it is, what the person across from you is saying or doing. I'll tell you, one of the things I've been very successful with is getting big donations. It's never been a part of my job, but somehow I've been actually really successful at getting donors to give us large amounts of money. And I realized afterwards, it is just about when you sit down with a donor, it doesn't matter, do they have $50 to give you? Do they have $500 to give you? It doesn't matter. Just sit down and listen to them. What is it they're saying? What are they interested in? Once you know what they're interested in, you can then make that, you don't even make that ask, you dangle that opportunity in front of them. And that's how it really is. So, really just listening. I tell you, it really irritates me also when people will say things like, so you are saying that da, 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 da. It's like, what is this? Either you're condescending to me or you're being a moron. What is it? Stop repeating back everything I say. Just listen, or the same, and I can listen. I mean, you can definitely clarify if you don't understand or ask, but don't use all these artificial kind of, because people get so focused on this is what I should do to signify that I'm listening, that they forget to listen. So I would say just relax, be yourself. And when someone's talking to you, stop, listen, wait for them to finish talking, and then ask your next question. Because, often one of the things we do is that we're already thinking, what is the next question we're going to ask? And really get away from that, because silence never hurts anyone. If you have a moment of silence after the other person stops talking, it's perfectly fine. You can take that time to collect your thoughts and talk. So, I would just say that's slow down, listen, look. I mean, listening part, looking at the other person is part of listening also.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned about like a cultural kind of thing as far as when it comes to listening or even in communication, because this is something that someone told me a long time ago, and I've never forgotten it, is that I was talking to her and she said, you don't make very good eye contact. Is it like a cultural thing? And I thought about it for a minute, and then I guess I probably should have just agreed and said, yeah, that was my excuse for not doing it. But, it really made an impression on me because, I mean, to that day, I also realized that, yeah, there are maybe some kind of cultural norms that you may need to just try to fix it if it was ingrained in you for some reason,
Yeah.
as long as you're not, you don't feel like you're compromising your soul to try to do something differently. And, at least in the case of the whole eye contact thing. Yeah, I mean, I'm very conscious of that now because it's still, at least personally for me, it's very, very hard to do to this day.
Right.
But, I just realized too that if I need to be a little bit more successful or be perceived as, maybe being someone that's confident and that's in the moment, I got to learn how to do that. So I guess maybe that would be the other side of the story. But yeah, I totally get it about the whole idea that, yeah, there are just cultural things that, a lot of people just are not aware of because they've never experienced that side of things.
Yeah, yeah, and it's also styles. I know I myself, I tend to close my eyes a lot when I'm thinking and I tend to look up. And it's not because I'm not listening to you. It's how I think. That's how I work. And so, being aware that the person across from me, like you are saying, you, Robert, maybe it's not something they're comfortable with, but doesn't mean they're not listening. Just being aware of that. Stop judging the person across from you. Just listen. And this is true for everyone, whether it's the staff you oversee, the staff, your peers, whether it's your superiors, really just sit back, listen, take it in.
All right, here. This is a question I usually start these interviews with, but I kind of forgot about it actually. But it's something that I always tell like upcoming leaders that relationships or confidence in relationships are like two cornerstones of being a leader. And people say to me, well, you seem to know a lot of people. And I do know a lot of people, mainly because I'm old and I've been around for a while. But, how people meet it can be very circumstantial, or there's no one right way to do it. So do you remember when we first met? Because I'd be very interested in hearing what you have to say.
So I think we first met at one of the library directors conference, those forums. But when we really got to know each other was when I think we did the grant workshops at Monterey, because y'all had, I had just heard all these amazing things about you and what your library was doing and Michelle. And I was like, okay, I heard about the grant opportunity to apply for that. And that's, I think, at least that's the way I remember it. That's when I really got to know both of you.
I remember the first time we really, I think, interacted. The first day we went up there, you sent me an email, say, call me from your hotel when you get here and I will come and pick you up. I said, great. So I said, we're here. But I was with one of the trainers. So there were two of us. And I remember you drove up in this little sports car that didn't have a back seat. It didn't have a back seat. And somehow one of us had to cram into that back seat. And I think it was me.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I remember, man, you drive like a madwoman. And It was good that we got there quickly, but it scared the hell out of me too. But it's all good. And it's just.
You're not supposed to let out all my secrets.
Oh, wow.
No, I love driving. I really love driving. And I do have a somewhat fast car. So I do enjoy that.
All right. Well, good for you. Okay. So what have you been doing to pass the time of late? Or do you have extra free time?
It's been actually really rough how busy we are at this time, or at least how busy I've been. And it's been, the phone, my laptop, my computer, everything is binging nonstop. There's things all the time. But, I love gardening. I think many of you, at least those of you who are my Facebook friends and know me otherwise know I really, really love growing my own vegetables and things. So It's been kind of hard because in Monterey, we actually have this little greenhouse we built of our own. And so I had planted all this stuff over there and then immediately came back here. And now I can't go back and see my little babies growing. So I have to keep calling the family there and saying, are you watering my plants? Are you keeping track of them? So, I did do some gardening. I have some plants going over here. But I just decided to do this thing is make one of these squares for a quilt, which is a refugee quilt project. So those of you who don't know, that's the 25 million stitches, each stitch representing a refugee. So I'm doing that. And I decided to take a sort of, in between do that. I love cooking and things, of course, but yeah, that's sort of something new I've started at this point. Yeah, we like that.
Okay, it's going to be a question for you, but I want to hear from the audience from this one as well. So what is one thing that you are grateful for now? In audience, again, I would like to hear from you. And I will start this too. I'll tell you what I'm grateful for, among other things, is that I'm very lucky that the person I am quarantined with, my wife, she is so self-contained. She's one of those people that have like a million projects. So she's always working on something. Lately, she's been making a mask actually for the city of Pasadena, but she's not doing that. She'll be out in the garden. She's not out in the garden. She's going to be emailing, friends from across the world. And then while the whole time she's doing it, she's listening to, some ebook. And so it's just great to be able to be with a person that, is just, I don't know what I'm doing half the time, but at least I don't have to worry about her because, and it's just such a nice relief. And I hear, I was reading an article, I think it was with Randy Newman, the music guy, and he was saying that he thought like the thing that was really going to skyrocket after this COVID thing is the divorce rate, because people are forced to be in close quarters with, someone for month on end. But I consider myself very grateful for the fact that among all the other things, I do not have to worry about that. What about you, Jayanti?
I will say I love the music, being able to listen to all kinds of streaming music. But I'm really grateful for these technologies which let us see each other face to face like that. Because I am, by myself over here. I am really in isolation in terms of the sheltering in place. So I'm really grateful. We use WhatsApp a lot. And so, just being able to chat with my husband every day. And so it's curious that you're talking about possibly the divorce rate going up. I think it's actually the reverse, because I think we're doing a lot more chatting and talking with each other. We're in close quarters, and you sort of rediscover people in a way. But I love WhatsApp. And so my husband and I talk on WhatsApp every day, which we did anyway since I moved to Hayward. But it's also that, the whole family, we get on together and we're all of us there together. So it's kind of fun, that being able to do that. So I'm really grateful for some of the technology that's made it possible to do this, staying in touch with others. On the other hand, I'm really irritated by some of the emails that constantly fill your mailbox with, someone sends a picture or a joke, and then everyone has to respond with lovely, wonderful, thank you. And it's like, for heaven's sakes, don't reply all, just reply to the person. We don't need our mailboxes filled with all those thank yous and yes and no and things like that. But yeah, I really love the technology.
All right, good.
So what are people saying?
Well, I'm going to give you one more question. I still want to see what other people are grateful for, if you want to share that with us.
Yeah, I'd love to see what people are grateful for.
In the meantime, so Jayanti, what's your favorite book, movie, music, and food?
Oh, wow. Okay, so let me go backwards. So food, if I had to pick a food, I love eating. I will eat anything. I have not met a food I will not try. But if I had to, and I was going to be told, you can only eat this, I would probably go for Japanese. I love Japanese food. In terms of book, I read a lot. I love reading nonfiction. And so I talk about this all the time. One of my all-time favorite books is Richard Feynman's Letters, which is, what was it called? Perfectly Reasonable Deviations, and that I love that book. It's his letters. And then, but I also love Leonardo da Vinci's biography he was the guy from Aspen Institute, Isaacson, I think his name was. Anyway, so I like that. I'm currently reading or rereading a book I really enjoyed, if you want a fiction, which is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. It's a really sweet book. It came out about 3 years ago. So I had read it then, and my book club is reading it again right now. So I would say that, yeah, so that would be a favorite book. Music, I listen to all kinds of music. But if I had to pick something, I really love, I think, like the guitar, sort of rock guitar in a way. Like I love Joe Bonamassa. I love Eric Clapton. Yeah, Stevie Ray Vaughan, that kind. So I really love guitar. So, yeah.
Okay. And Christina, as a side note, apparently the chat has been turned off. So can you see, or apparently it's been disabled. If you can re-enable that, well then that would be nice.
Oh, no.
Okay, I'll look at it.
Oh, huh. Well, that's too bad. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll try to figure out how to get started. But in the meantime, it looks like there are a few questions here that
Okay.
have been submitted. And I'm going to go through, it looks like
Okay, so but while you're, getting ready to ask the question, one thing I want to just pop in and say is I'd like to congratulate Patty Wong for winning, talking of leadership. Patty is amazing. She's always been wonderful, and she just won the ALA presidency. So I just want to give her a shout out over here. Yeah.
California too.
Yay, California. Yay, Patty.
Okay, so Jayanti, what are your favorite places to eat in Hayward? Start with an easy one for you.
Oh my gosh, favorite place to eat in Hayward. I really like, there's a southern place called Plate. I like that a lot. You get southern food. They have some really good, and they have an amazing crab bisque. I really love that. There's one in Castro Valley, which is just, outside Hayward, which is called Genghis. And that sort of has all this a variety of Asian foods. It's sort of fusion. I love Genghis. It's really fun. Yeah, yeah.
Hey, any books you would recommend for those going into leadership positions like yours with new staff, pending new buildings, or maybe even a good, or do you even read leadership books?
I'm not a big reader of leadership books, I have to admit, sorry, but I do like reading. I like nonfiction so much. I will say, just talking of books, like the book Devil in the White City. I loved that book. It was really funny when our book club read it because I loved the parts that were about the Chicago World Fair. And I pretty much skipped all the murder mystery parts. And a lot of our book club people just skipped all the World Fair parts, were really focused on the murder mystery side of it. So anyway, just that's another book I really like. It's kind of old, but I really like it. And, but nothing to do with leadership.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the question for, okay, you should be able to give a good answer to this. Just how have you seen the efforts at inclusion and diversity of marginalized groups change over your work life?
Well, well, it's all been good. I'll say it's positive. So, and it really is, marginalized groups really vary. It's not just any one group. So for example, when I went to Monterey County, one of the things I realized is how much rural libraries were marginalized. They really were not being counted in any serious way. And I remember Stacey Aldrich saying, Jayanti, you just stick your head into a room. You don't even have to open your mouth. You may as well just have shouted rural libraries. But, it was really important for me to see us really talk about that, talk about issues that are specific to rural libraries who serve such a large part of our state. But then there's also, minorities. We have our profession also really has grown. We do see a lot more of minorities, both men and women actually moving into leadership positions, being librarians. They're not just in paraprofessional positions, they're actually in professional positions, doing a lot. And there's also this awareness, and I think there's really no one like librarians about being really strident in saying you need to serve everyone. And in most of our cities and counties, we are the group that's doing it. And I'm really proud of us for doing it. And I will say we need to continue doing it because we are the voice. We're usually the group that's most present in the community, makes the most contact. We can advocate for our public. And so we need to continue doing that. But it is really, it's very gratifying to see how far we've come from, the all white, the male leaders, in all of the top positions, and then the all white men and women to now being a lot more diverse. So it's really quite impressive that we made a lot of strides, and I'm really proud of everyone for the work they do. Yeah.
Okay, here's another question. That's a good one. It's interesting. Basically, the person asking the question says that they're a newbie and just starting to get into the profession. And now the whole thing's been kind of turned on its head. Could be kind of bleak, could be daunting, challenging, but what kind of advice would you have in these times of crisis for how a newbie can, start to find some traction in the current landscape?
So, one of the things, and I say this to people, regardless of whether we're in a crisis time or even in just regular times when we are flush with money, which, sometimes we are, is really about being willing to do whatever it takes. Do not be set on this is all I do. Really being open-minded in how you serve the public. Step in, do what needs to be done. That is probably the biggest thing. And we really are going to face some really tough times because there is no question, going to go into a recession and possibly even a depression. And, there will be a lot of cuts and libraries will get cut. And libraries are often seen as the first and the most easy sort of target for cuts. And so really, sort of advocate. I hope all of us who are in leadership positions will be strong advocates, be reaching out to the community, really talking to the community about making people in power hear and know what needs to be done, how valuable libraries are. Because libraries really, we are that group that's there to help people rebuild their lives. You can get money from the federal government for unemployment or whatever it is, but that's not going to be any use unless you have a good way to use your resources to build, to move forward. And so it's the same thing for us to really think moving forward, be open, be willing to do what it takes. Don't be stuck in this idea that I only do children's services or I only do this or I only do that. Be willing to step in, be willing to be flexible. If you are a children's librarian, be willing to say, okay, I'm going to step in and I'm going to help with technology. I'm going to help with, doing reference, whatever it takes. Do it, be willing, be flexible at this time. Nothing is going to get us through this time if we are not flexible. Yeah.
All right. I think we have two more questions. And one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning of the program, but if people want to hang out after we finish our Q&A, at least Jayanti and I are going to have a little wine discussion. And actually, I was going to do a little thing about 10 minutes about everything you need to know about wines. And that seemed to be kind of a thing.
I'm going to just turn on the light. I realized I'm sitting in the dark over here because of my fireplace. I'll just be right here. Yeah, I can hear you.
You didn't like the harsh lighting. I thought it was kind of nice, actually.
It just got dark.
And then while we're waiting for Jayanti to come back, a reminder.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I didn't even realize.
Next week at noon on Thursday, we're going to have our virtual lunch with Hillary Thayer, the CLA president, and she's going to talk about the decision process behind postponing the CLA conference, a little bit, maybe more about what's going to happen in 2021 and just her leadership journey. So I would encourage everyone, if you got some time next week at noon, it's going to be Hillary Thayer, and actually the registration is open for that right now. But back to you, Ms. Addleman.
Right.
Two questions. One is you mentioned that you like theater. So what's your favorite play or musical?
Oh my gosh. Well, I did go see Hamilton after we moved here. So, I'm very open. I like all kinds of things. I remember a play called Sylvia, which I really loved. Yeah, I see everything. I'm sitting at home. I actually watched, talking about musicals, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, which is a really, really old musical, but I love that. And so, just kind of, I love anything. I love theater. Yeah.
And then last formal question is, you worked in rural libraries, and you've always, as far as I know, like maybe the biggest advocate in California for rural libraries, but give us like two funny stories from the millions that you might have about what happened to you working in a rural library that us urban city folk probably have never even thought about.
Okay, so Monterey County, I have so many stories, and I know many of you have heard me telling a lot of these stories, but I'm trying to think. So I'll tell you one which is an animal story and one which is a human story. So animals, so I have any number of snake stories, but I won't do a snake story. But in South Monterey County, we have a lot of tarantulas. And they actually come out. And so there's twice a year, they will sort of do this. I guess they migrate from certain parts to certain parts. And we would do deliveries. Our delivery van would go. And our delivery van, the driver, actually, I remember her saying, I got delayed because the tarantulas were out. So she had to sit and wait while the tarantulas finished crossing the road before she could drive. And she also said a really incredible thing, how while she was driving and she suddenly saw these tarantulas, and her first reaction was spider, and she actually lifted her feet off the pedals. So she got her foot off the brake, off the off the accelerator, and was like, ah! But fortunately, there's no one out there. It is totally sort of fun. So anyway, so the tarantulas are there. And I remember one of our staff actually had said, I really want to have a tarantula as a pet. And one of the staff had got one and kept one for me. And she said, well, I'll send it to you through the delivery van. And I said, no, please don't do that. And so unfortunately, I didn't get my pet tarantula out of it, but that was it. But the other is, really people think completely differently in rural areas where, there's a lot of isolation. There's a lot of like managing, doing what you can. So we had one of these small libraries, which was really kind of, it was in this little building that, urban people could not even imagine that you would be in a building like that with its crooked floors and no bathrooms and just really, but that's what we had. And that's what we had our service in. And so we had been really working to try to get this branch, fixed up. And the landlord was not very, just not very supportive. And in the meanwhile, there was the wife who was also, I guess, she was the landlord's wife. Her name really wasn't on our lease, but she really felt that because they were the landlords, she got special benefits. And so would be in constant battle with our branch manager because she wouldn't bring her books back in time, didn't want to pay overdue fines. It was a constant battle. So anyway, we had got the point where we said, we really need to make this building, kind of fix it, make it ADA compliant and all of that. And so they said, okay, we're going to go back, look at it. And so we got the lease renewal. So the lease, and at that point we were paying $200 per month for that tiny little room where we had our library. And the lease renewal raised the rent from $200 a month to $2,700 a month.
Wow.
But that wasn't it. What was the real kicker was that we also had to make the wife the branch manager. And that was written into the lease. And that's the kind of thing you'll get in rural libraries that you will not get in an urban setting. So, yeah. But it's all, I love rural libraries. It's just so much fun. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So,
I'm just going to make a case for this. If you're talking of as newbies, what can you do? Work in a rural library. I will say there are so many rural libraries. I'll tell you, the US, California, we are nothing without our food. And rural libraries serve the people that grow our food. I will say that. There are also such a large number of rural libraries. You really just do it. The chances of getting promotions in rural libraries are really high. You can actually, if you have a degree, if you have that background, rural libraries are a really good place to learn to do absolutely everything. You get out, you have to do everything. There's nothing you don't do, but you also get opportunities to grow and promote. So I will say really consider rural libraries. That's
okay,
my favorite.
so
yeah.
The formal part of our talk tonight is basically we got a webcam here, we got a webcam here, we have a webcam there. Jayanti, say whatever you want to the people out in library land.
I will say to the people out in library land, listen, listen, listen. Absolutely. Listen to your patrons, listen to your co-workers, listen to your supervisors, listen to those you supervise. That is probably the single way you will be able to serve people well. You will be able to do a good job. Really listen to what people are saying, what's going on in the world.
Okay, so
My advice.
ready to learn about wine?
I am ready.
Well, you feel free to jump in, and people, this is the formal interview, or our program is over now. So if you don't want to learn more about wine in about the next 5 minutes, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah.
And thank you all so much for, doing what you're doing and continue to do it. Stay safe, take care of each other. But in the meantime, let's...
So I just want to also say thank you to everyone for listening, and thank you for all the great questions. And if I didn't answer any questions, feel free to just, email me. You can find me online. You can just go to Hayward Public Library's website and you can find me. But really, thank you all so much. I really appreciate your coming. Yeah.
Now let's talk about wine here. I'm going to, in the next about 5-10 minutes, try to teach you everything I know about wine, and we'll go from there. So we'll start first with Jayanti with some fun wine facts. So what country produces the most wine?
Oh my gosh. The US?
Wrong. Anyone in the audience, they might feel free to come in. It's Italy, by far. France is second. And the US is, I think we're about fourth.
Oh, okay.
But what country drinks the most wine per capita?
France.
No. This one surprised me, actually. It's Portugal.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
They
Portugal. Yeah.
It works out to about 75 bottles a year.
Wow.
Here's a chart of, that's liters, but how much, and if you see the US, we're like way down here. It's like, what? We're drinking 15 bottles a year. I spill more wine than that in a month.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I think that's not everyone drinks wine, so yeah. But
yeah, hey, I was just kind of surprised that maybe, the US really does not. And then another fun fact, and these are the kind of things that you can, when you have pretentious friends or family members who think they know a lot about wine, well then, just other things you can tell them. What country has the most land dedicated to growing grapes.
Hmm. Well, I've been striking out so far, so.
This one is hard. I don't think you'd probably get this one either, but it's Spain.
Oh, interesting.
Followed by, actually, the second most is China. And have you ever had a Chinese wine?
I have not.
So
Chinese
there you
beer.
go. And then when it comes to the United States, I think it's pretty obvious. I'll just tell you that California produces 85% of all wine in the United States.
Hey,
Yep. Second most state, do you know that?
Oregon?
Washington,
Washington? Okay, yeah.
5%. New York is 3%. And then the other, 47 states produce the other, 7% of wine out there. But all 50 states do have a wine, at least 2 vineyards. And there are some interesting things like pineapple wine in Hawaii.
Oh my gosh.
And there are, I don't know if you know what ice wine is, but like in Michigan and Pennsylvania, they make ice wine. And basically what ice wine is it has to be frozen grapes, because when grapes freeze, apparently they get real sweet. And so that's what they do is they make ice wine out of that. But, really, it's all about the grape. And I think another thing that is, an analogy is with a sports team. You can have great coaches, you can have a nice stadium, good uniforms, but if you don't have good players, your team is still going to suck. And it's out to the same way with wine. It's all about the grape.
Yeah, well, ice wine's quite expensive, though, at least good ice wine.
It's really sweet, too. So I'm going to right now real quickly point out why European countries are just so much, I think, more advanced when it comes to wine than the United States. And I think the biggest reason is because they take their wine very seriously and they have laws for their wines. And I'll show you a couple things here. Is when it comes to Spain, I've been drinking a Spanish wine all night, but if you look at the bottle of this one, for example, you'll notice, and it says the word Crianza at the top. And basically what that means is this wine has been aged in oak for 1 year and then in the bottle for 1 year. But it's a law that, you can't call it that unless it's, that's what you're doing. But it works out to the same thing with, here's another Spanish wine. This one says it's a Gran Reserva. And that means it's been in oak for, I think it's 3 years, and in the bottle for 5 years. And they cannot call it that unless they're really doing it. The same thing in Italy. They have their own little laws. And again, if you ever go to the store and you're going to buy an Italian wine, look for this when you're at Trader Joe's, a label. It says DOCG. Basically, again, legally, the Italian law says that you cannot put that label on unless all the grapes in this particular wine are coming from one specific region. And the government taste tests this wine too and says, yeah, this thing is good. So if you buy an Italian wine that has that label, you're going to get a good bottle of wine. So keep that in mind. And they're not expensive. If you go to Trader Joe's the next time, go to the Italian section, you'll see this label on some wines that cost $6, $7. And it's going to be fine because the government says it's a good bottle of wine. Contrasting, United States. Here's a bottle. And if you can read it, it says Signature Reserve. It has a vintage and all that, but in the United States, you can put anything on a label, basically. And there's no laws really about it, as far as what dictates what you can put on a label. That does not work in Europe. If you say it's doing something, it's not. So here's another American wine. It has the name of the maker, Jordan. Cabernet, it's got the vintage. But the only thing that's dictated or governed on this particular bottle is what the grape name is, Cabernet Sauvignon. And it only means that 75% of the grape in this particular bottle is a Cabernet grape. What that other 25% is, who knows? But again, that's why it really is about the grape, because at least if you're getting an Italian wine, a Spanish wine, and it says it's a Rioja, it says it's a Barolo, it is. But in the U.S., they can call this thing a reserve. They can call it a vintner's reserve. From the winemaker's library. That stuff don't mean shit. That's just marketing. They're just making all of that stuff up, and they're hoping that you're going to buy it because it looks impressive. This actually is a good bottle of wine, but I could put reserve on anything I want to, and just like I call myself a master wine drinker, doesn't mean anything. It's just something that's made up. So I keep that in mind, when you're at your store. And then this is the other part of that I want to talk about real quick is one thing that happens, at least to me, when I go to the store, because I'm one of those guys that's carrying that 6-pack of thing, and I'm trying to figure out what to get. But people always ask me what kind of wine should I buy? And, treat it as like a reader advisory type of question, because there's basically, if someone asks you, what kind of wine should I buy? The first thing I always say is, well, what are you going to have for dinner? And then they always say, well, I don't know. And generally it's because they've been invited to someone else's house for dinner, and they're told, bring a bottle of wine. So I ask them, well, what you're going to eat? And they say, I don't know. I'm not cooking dinner. So this is something else I would, I tell people sometimes is that the whole concept of the food and the wine pairing, I kind of think it's a fallacy myself. If you're going to buy a wine, buy something that you want to drink. So if you're going to take this to someone's house, whether they're having chicken or steak or, Thai food, just make sure it's a wine that you want to drink. And, at least you'll be happy. Even if you don't like the food, you're going to like the wine that you brought over.
Yeah. So I think to add, don't feel shy to open your wine when you take it there.
Oh, absolutely. and the whole thing about chicken and fish go with white wine, and steak and, red spaghetti sauce goes with red wine. I really don't think that makes a difference. If you like drinking the wine, well, who cares what food you're eating? Because at least the wine is going to taste good. So I don't get hung up on that when people say, well, what kind of wine should I buy? Because, as long as you like to drink it, that's really the biggest criteria that you can have. But the next point kind of brings me to the whole idea of wine and pretension, because there are some people that are really pretentious about it. And I'm sure you may have some people in your family and your friends, coworkers. And, for some reason, people seem to be intimidated about wine because, everyone drinks wine, or most people drink wine, but I think most people know very little about it, and they're ashamed to maybe admit it. And, I don't see what the big deal is actually, because I don't know anything about, hip hop music. I don't know very much about, the Winter Olympics and, what curling is, but, it didn't stop me from asking questions about it. So it might be the same thing about, when it comes to wine. And, really, bottom line, if you like it, well then, that's good enough. But here's something else, and I've actually done this before, is, when you're with people that you think are kind of pretentious, or maybe you want to put them in their place and they're all drinking their wine or whatever, just say something like this. Well, actually, for the price point, I much prefer something from Lodi or Paso Robles. And, they're going to kind of wonder, well, what the heck are you talking about? They're going to be impressed by that. So, and then, just pick up your wine, kind of sniff it, and then, that's all you have to do. And then as far as, if you really have to buy a bottle of wine, this is something that I would do is you're going to see when you go to the store, and you're going to notice I'm only talking about red wine because that's the only wine that I drink. But you're going to see certain, makers, people like Kendall Jackson, Hess, Justin, Rodney Strong, Coppola. You're going to see, maybe 3 or 4 different kinds of those wines by those people on the shelf. And really, it's kind of analogous to buying a car, in that these wines, they're all going to be at different prices. One will be $8, $9, $12, $15, and $25. So, but they're all Cabernet. And so, which one you get. But it's really like, if you're thinking about maybe buying like a Honda, you've got a Civic, you got an Accord, you got the Acura. They're just all basically some variation of the same thing. A BMW, you got the 3 Series, 5 Series, 7 Series, the Z4. So I've always tell people that if you're going to buy a wine and you see like Kendall Jackson, just get the one that's in the middle. Don't get the cheapest one, but by far, definitely don't get the most expensive one unless you want to pay like $50. And you're going to get a good bottle of wine. And then, when you take it over to wherever you are, again, when you give it to your host or whoever, just say, I really like the vintage of this particular wine. And they're going to be impressed, whether it's true or not. And then here's the last thing that I'm going to talk about. If you really want to impress people, the next time you get invited over to, out to their house for dinner, and, your pretentious wine friends, when it comes to red wines, there's a wine called Screaming Eagle. Have you ever heard of it, Jayanti?
Yeah, I have.
I mean, every wine person, I think, who knows a little bit of wine has heard about it, but I guarantee you none of them have ever drank it before. But it's just super expensive. I think if you can actually buy it, it's about $3,500 for one bottle. And if you're in a restaurant, it's going to be like, I've seen it for over $12,000. And but if you ever get invited, this is the wine that you want to bring. It's called The Pairing. And I mean, if you want to talk about an unpretentious label, it says, 2015 and red. And that's it. And there's very little on the back. It says it's from Buellton. But this particular wine is actually from the same winery. It's the sister winery of where they make Screaming Eagle wine. And then actually the winemaker is for Screaming Eagle actually came up with this one. But the biggest difference is that it's, I think I paid $23 for this. You can get it from wine.com. So if you really want to impress those pretentious people next time, bring this with them. You can tell them the little backstory, and then they'll say, oh, wow, okay, this person knows about wine. So keep that in mind. But, really, that's 5 minutes on wine. As much as I do now, but the other thing, I think wine should be fun. And so the next time, maybe, after this COVID quarantine dies down, invite some people over. Tell them to bring, a $2 chuck from, Trader Joe's, and maybe a $15 bottle. And just do a blind tasting and see if you can actually see what the difference is. Or, buy 5 different bottles of this, by Rodney Strong, and see if you can tell which one is the cheapest one and which one's the most expensive one. Just have fun with that.
Yeah. So
What do you do? Go ahead.
I just want to add, $2 chuck is now $3 chuck.
Oh no.
Yeah, so it's no longer $2 chuck. So yeah.
Does it still taste?
No. Well, but I mean, what they say about $3 chuck or when you look at cheap wines, it's, you can do it even in Costco or in Trader Joe's. What they say is you take a bottle, you go out to your car, quickly open it, taste it. If it's good, run in and pick up 12 more, because there's no consistency, things like $3 chuck. It's whatever they have that time. So, really being aware of that. So someone asked about $2 chuck, so I just want to throw that in.
I think I've had it before. But...
Can I ask you a question, yeah. Robert? What about the scores, the points on wines? You'll see 91 points, 93 points. How much credence should we give those point systems?
I've always found that when you see like Wine Spectre 92 and it's actually on the bottle, that's an excuse to, to jack up the price by another $10 or so. I mean, I've tried, some wines that are, I don't know, they've scored relatively high. Hey, they're good wine, but I've also, tasted wines that weren't scored that were, $8 that in my opinion were just as good. So I think a lot of people get kind of, I don't know, sucked into the whole wine pretensions because, there is some pretentious wine guy that's saying that, yeah, this is a 94 or, a 91 or whatever it is. And you tend to believe them. And, I'm not going to argue with them and say it's not good wine, but I think just because, something doesn't have a score on it is not a good wine as well. And I think probably the most important thing is if I like it, I don't really give a damn what you think.
Right,
Yeah,
definitely.
take that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Do you have a favorite like pairing? I mean, I don't mean like the pairing label, but do you like sort of something, say barbecue and something or anything like that? Do you have?
Someone else actually mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I really love to drink like a Cabernet and eat chocolate and maybe some ice cream, like with dessert, or if maybe like a poached pear that's been poached in wine and then drinking wine and having like, Hershey's chocolate sauce. I'm happy. You give that to me and I'll eat that all day. And, but, like I like steak and I like wine, but, I think another difference, at least with me, is when you're eating food, when you're drinking wine, you're doing this. So, with beer, that's different because you're eating a burger and then you're chugging down 3 or 4 gulps. I think that makes a big difference in what you're drinking and what you're eating. But if you're only kind of, sipping something and eating it, and again, it's just me. But I personally don't think it makes a whole lot of difference as far as what gets paired up. But maybe my palate is just, I've been drinking for too long or something, and I've killed all my taste buds.
Yeah.
Okay, well, again,
Thank you. That was very, very interesting. Thank you.
Well, go out and, drink some wine. And once this whole quarantine is over, I'm going to bust this guy out. And if they're in the area, you have a standing invitation to come on over.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Good. Thank you.
And for everyone else out in library land, again, thank you all so much for coming around. Next week is Hillary Thayer. And then, until then, continue to take care of each other, be safe, and bye-bye.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Thank you, Christine. Bye. I'm just going to read some of the comments before I go out. Yeah. I suppose it'll be record. I can see it later. Okay. Yeah. Christine will send out the link, right?
Yeah, it should be ready by tomorrow for sure.
All right, great. Well, thank you. All right,
Okay.
well, good night.
Good night.
That was fun. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you so much, Jayanti.
Okay, bye.